Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review for She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker-Chan. This is the first book in a adult historical fantasy duology. This follows the main character of Shu, and she was born a peasant and had like a nothing fate according to this like fortune teller, but everyone said that her brother was like destined for greatness, and her brother ends up dying, and so she ends up taking on his fate essentially and like dressing as him, going to a monastery and like going on that journey. This is a gender-bent reimagining of a historical figure who did start the Ming Dynasty. In addition to her POV, we also get the POV of a eunuch general whose entire family was killed by this one ruling Mongol family, and he has been serving that family for years and now is on like a path of potential revenge and vengeance. So first off, this is a historical fantasy, but this is very light on the fantasy elements. So as far as world building, you're not going to get a lot of fantastical things. The few fantastical things that are in here are one, that the like ruling class or whoever's like the emperor basically has a mandate from heaven where they can almost like summon fire, but it's not fire that's used for anything besides just like an image. And also a couple of the characters in here can see ghosts. None of that is used for anything beyond just like visuals. And so predominantly this is more of a historical fiction, a lot of focus on like political machinations and war and things like that. Next, I'll talk about our characters. I enjoyed our two main characters. Zhu is interesting as far as like how is she going to navigate all of this, a lot of exploration of like gender and stuff. She still uses her pronouns for herself and her POV. Everyone else thinks that she's a man, and her kind of opinion about her gender sort of evolves throughout, but a lot of discussion with her about like fate, destiny, taking fate into your own hands, things like that. There is also a sapphic relationship in here. Very minor though. People do talk about this being like a sapphic book. There's also, people always mention that there is a fisting scene very late on into the story that you're kind of like, whoa. But overall, there's not a lot of like particularly graphic sexual content. I mean, that's pretty graphic, but it's not mainly a like sapphic romance or anything. As far as our other character, I really enjoyed him and like his journey, the way that these two characters sort of like are attached and entwined in a lot of ways, even though they don't necessarily realize it. He has this like very interesting tension that is also homoerotic with one of his like really good friends, and there's like a lot just like toxic shit going on there. There's also a lot of like misogyny and things in this book, not that's like condoned, but that is definitely shown for the time, and also like in particularly in his POV, because of everything that's been done to him, he is definitely like very misogynistic. But other characters like point that out to him and like why he is that way and things like that. So again, it's not condoning any of the behavior. So overall, I liked our characters. I'm not necessarily thinking that they're gonna stick out as like favorites of all time at this point, but I think as the story continues and into like the next part of the duology, I'm gonna continue to like be intrigued by them. Definitely not necessarily likable, but very interesting. Last, I'm gonna talk about the plot. As I mentioned, this is much more of like a war story, so a lot of like war machinations and battle strategies and things like that. I'm not really big on like fantasy war stories. I mean, again, it's not even super fantasy. I'm just not very like military stories aren't like a big thing for me that I love. But this also kind of balanced that out pretty well with a lot of these like relationship things, like how all these people are sort of like intersecting different power struggles. A lot of like, for lack of a better word, court intrigue. It's not court in the same way as like a medieval fantasy would be, but like that kind of political machinations type thing. This definitely had like what I would call a medium pace too, where like it's not necessarily super fast. I didn't always necessarily be like, I need to pick this up and see what happens, but it wasn't necessarily slow either. But I would say the more intriguing parts for me were those character interactions and things. So overall, I enjoyed this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This did remind me a lot, but less fantasy, obviously, of like the Poppy War, for example. So if you liked the Poppy War, or you're even intimidated by the Poppy War, I would say maybe read this, because this has a lot of those same elements of like war stuff and machinations, but lighter on the fantasy and lighter on the grimdark. This definitely still has some things. There are like trigger warnings in here for like war and torture, murder, things like that. But I would say this is less dark than like the Poppy War. So if you want to try this and see how you like this before going to the Poppy War, they're not the same story, but similar vein in the same like theme, I would say. So comment below, let me know what you thought of She Who Became the Sun. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.